2. Good afternoon. This is Mayor Cyril Jefferson convening a special meeting of the High Point City Council. We have another budget work session for the fiscal year 2024-2025 budget. With me in the room are every member of council, save for Councilmember Tyrone Johnson, who did communicate that he is en route and will be here shortly. With that, I'll call for a vote to adopt the agenda. Is there a motion to approve? So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made by Mayor Pro Tem Holmes, second made by Councilmember Cook. Any discussion on the motion to adopt our agenda for today? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any against? There are none, the motion passes. With that, we have our agenda. The first item up is 2024-214. Business City of High Point proposed budget. To continue our discussion on this. With that, I'll pass it to Madam Manager Logan Ford.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. The items that we have before you this afternoon are a follow-up from our last budget work session. There were some specific areas where council asked for us to go back and specifically prioritize and look at the capital projects that were submitted as part of the budget. We also wanted to look at the potential use of fund balance and what the impact or the implications would be if council used fund balance to handle some of the costs that are in this year's budget. Also wanted to take a look at the parking fund subsidy. And then there was also just a bullet that I included that talked about projects for future discussion. This was centered around the conversation that came up near the end around how the council would like to look at address housing. That's not an item that's included in our current budget, but there may be some options for us to think about that in future years, depending on how our current budget tracks for next year. With the capital projects, there are a couple of things that I wanted to point out before Stephen actually gets into the presentation. Staff did go back through the list of capital projects that were included in the budget, and we did prioritize those things. I wanted to just make sure that I reiterated that the items that are included in the budget are only a portion of what departments already requested from us. So before we ever included those items in the budget, as a staff team, we did go through them and prioritize what we felt like was most important to bring to you all. It was based on projects that we have either already committed to, we have some level of federal funding that might be attached to those, and we're also always trying to balance needs that we know are going to be coming up, especially as it relates to deferred maintenance, to make sure that we're not getting too much further behind in maintaining some of our facilities. The other piece that I wanted to speak to is that the question has come up around, across the board adjustments. There were a very in-depth analysis that was done looking at specific line items if there had been more than like a 10% increase or 15% increase. And staff provided that as part of the fact sheet, what was driving those particular increases. There's also been some conversations about doing just an across-the-board cut. We addressed that at the last meeting as well, starting with page MM9, where before this budget was ever presented, we actually had a reduction in each one of our expenditures. If you look at our operating, capital outlay, debt service, and contingency, if you look at that chart, each one of those was a reduction in those line items, except for personnel. And personnel, you see there was a 6.9% increase, and a big part of what's driving the need for us to have some additional revenue in this year's budget is associated with our personnel costs. So with that said, I would ask Stephen if he'll just delve into the questions that were asked at our last meeting. Feel free to stop and ask us at any point if there are any questions that come up while we're discussing this. I think staff's presentation for today is fairly brief and fairly short. We wanted to just leave time for council to deliberate, ask questions, and make any adjustment that you feel might be needed. Stephen?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the City Council. These are the work session topics, but City Manager kind of alluded to those, so we'll get kind of right into the meat of the presentation. The capital prioritization. So this list is from highest at the top to lowest at the bottom. And I'm not going to go through each project, but I do want to note just a couple things. You'll notice fire station upgrades, renovations, and Parks and Recreation deferred maintenance program are listed twice. That is intentional. We prioritize kind of a portion of those funds at a higher level, and then saying if you're going to cut a piece of that, the departments still could do some of those projects, but not the full freight of what they're planned. And so that's why you see that listed twice. You see in the kind of to the right is kind of a notes column of what the total proposed budget for those projects were. This does, if you look in the book, you'll notice there's one project, the ERP upgrade, that's not on the list, on this list. That list is not funded by any general fund local dollars, and so we didn't include it because the direction of the conversation was kind of on capital in relation to the increases in the general fund. There were some specific questions on the capital side. One was in relation to the shared use kitchen and whether exploring an option to eliminate that budget of $350,000. So just a little bit of background. The estimated construction start for that project was March of 2025, but we're still currently in the design phase for that project with an estimated construction completion of April 2026. The $350,000 was the first of two planned installments of around the same amount. We need about $700,000 to $800,000 for FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. I always want to say fixins and equipment, and I know that's not right. So our strategy was to try and budget that over 2 years. If you budget $700,000 or $800,000 out of the total capital, that's like a little over 30%, maybe higher, of your capital allocation. So didn't want to have that large of a chunk for one project, knowing that there was kind of a 2-year timeline for the project. Implications, if it were reduced or eliminated, the funds would be identified prior to construction to cover the FF&E expenses. And the full allocation, just note there, is about 31% of the proposed general capital. And so that was kind of the justification for trying to spread it over 2 fiscal years.
This is also a project where we have a federal allocation to help with the support of the construction of the project. So the reason that we want to make sure we didn't completely eliminate this is we do realize that there's some time restrictions tied to the federal funding that we got for the project.
Meaning if we don't meet them, we'll lose it.
Do we know what the
Potentially.
updated timeline is?
So as with the raise grant, we got an extension on that timeline, but as of right now, the funds are supposed to be spent by 2026. Now that there could be some continuing resolution that may adjust that, but at this time, we don't know that would shift or change.
But also, as far as this proposed start date, do we know how far down that's moved now?
Right now, we're still in design. We're still designing the facility, so we still want to be on target to be able to start our construction in March if everything continues to go according to the schedule.
This is Councilman Andrew. Percentage-wise, how much, with the total cost of this project, how much is federal and how much is city? I mean, ballpark.
Of what's currently budgeted, there's $2 million in the federal grant and then $2 million in ARPA-enabled funds.
Okay, so $4 million is external to city funds toward this project, and we are committing more or less to $750,000. Is that about right?
For the FF&E. And we still, once we get design back, I want to set realistic expectations for us. A lot of the projects are coming in over those cost estimates when they were originally done. That's why we've got to get a little bit further in design to make sure that $4 million will really cover the cost of construction. But we do know right now we have $4 million in additional funds outside of the city's support going towards this project.
So there's a possibility that the $4 million would not be sufficient and we would have to commit to more from the city if we wanted to move forward with this project.
Potentially, but we need to get further in design before we can have a solid answer for that.
Understood, thank you.
Another suggestion was just a use of fund balance for general capital projects, $500,000, and this would be suggested as a one-time usage. And so implications on that, it being one-time usage would mean that it's not available, or we're assuming it's not available next fiscal year, so future budgets could have less available funding. The manager alluded to kind of what's proposed for capital is just a portion, and the future years, so we do a 5-year CIP, so years 2 through 5 for general capital total, a little over $31.2 million. And so, what that need has been identified. I mean, we're not going to fund that whole need. It's a high amount, and so we're going to look at every year prioritization of what most needs to be funded, and then. If it's one-time usage, if we want to make sure we still have that amount, restoring the funds could require additional growth in your general purpose revenues. So revenues could do really well, and we could then plug it back. But also, revenues may have to go toward other things, other pressures on the budget. And so then other options are expense reductions or further use of reserves, which we've talked about. But We kind of looked at this through the lens of a one-time usage of fund balance for this much in capital funding.
Stephen, assuming we're gonna raise the property tax to some level, I mean, the ad valorem sales tax, do you have an estimate of sort of the gain from property tax increase? Because I mean, this year we lost 800 and some thousand because rates were raised, but I know they're working on their budget too, but on the assumption they're not raising the property tax in the county, do you have any idea about how much to expect in the following year?
We've run, I call it back of the napkin math because we just try to be quick with it because there's a lot of factors we don't know. But it's about $300,000 per penny, assuming that Greensboro stays flat and Guilford stays flat. If the smaller jurisdictions have changes, they get such a small distribution of sales tax that I don't think it would move the needle enough where it would really affect us. It's really those two jurisdictions and what they do with their rates. And this is based on, very high level blanket growth and evaluation estimates and things of that nature, but we did want to kind of see how it would impact us. Another suggestion, and one that's been talked about, using fund balance one time for the stadium internal loan payment. So that exact amount is $443,323. Some of the implications are the same of what you saw with capital. Restoring the funds would require, if there's additional growth in revenues or reductions in expenses, again, we'd have to see as we get into next budget development cycle. And I did just want to note, it's not specific to this, but really any of our expenses, using fund balance for recurring expenses is something that could negatively affect our city's bond rating. Again, we looked at this through the lens of a one-time usage, but we did just want to kind of remind council that is something that the bond raters do look at.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Councilman Andrew again. May I have an estimate of revenue that the stadium generates, ticket sales, things like that? Is that available yet? And we have it downtown, people are using it. I mean, those ticket sales and everything else like that, is that a net? I mean, I'm sure it's not a net positive yet, but is it anticipate? I mean, how does that work?
Our money comes from who we have leasing the stadium from us.
So that's the number I was looking for.
Yeah, I'm assuming.
I can speak to that. So it's we have a lease agreement with High Point Baseball Inc. that generates $400,000 a year, and then there's a $500,000 naming right that comes to the city as well. And then
Per year.
there's per year,
on
yes,
that, right?
per year on all these numbers. And then we have a $250,000 allocation from the occupancy tax that we withhold from the CVB or the Visit High Point distribution. Those are the, I guess, cash coming in due to the stadium.
And then, sorry, just real quick, the county also, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to figure out, the county in 2021 made the vote, I think it was $7 million. Was it tax incremental financing to support it? What was used?
It wasn't tax increment financing.
It's not. So it's $350,000 a year, and it's based on us meeting a certain amount of growth in the downtown area.
In terms of our tax base.
Correct. So I think they've established it, I think, either 3 or 5 years at the 350 level, and then we have to meet a certain metric after the initial 3 or 5 years, and I don't remember off the top of my head, to keep that 350 per year.
Thank you. Could you email that to me one week, because I'd like to have that.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, Stephen, since this is all internal, the transferring, using the general operating fund and put it into the electric fund payback, doesn't change the ratio, right? The LGC looks at, right? Because it's all internal. You add it all up, it'd still be the same, right? Or not?
It's internal, so there's more flexibility. The next, I think, 2 or 3 years go toward electric. After that, there's a repayment to the solid waste post-closure reserve fund. And so at some point, we would need to restart it. I don't think it's something that could just be defer, not eliminate.
Well, I didn't mean that. I just meant if you're doing the calculation, get to the 30.7, I guess. Using the general fund, or the general fund balance and putting it to pay the loan back with the electric fund, that would still be 30.7, right, when you did the calculation, right?
So for the purpose of that 10% city policy or the 25% LGC, it's just the general fund. So once you send that $443,000 to the electric fund, it does not come into the calculation anymore for the general fund, available fund.
I know that, but in terms of the total, right? Because you were saying the LGC just looks at, that's 25% now. They don't
No,
do-
no, no, that is still just the general
General
fund. They do, I think maybe where I lost you, was they do let you include the debt service fund balance, which is our reserve for debt service payments. But there is, and that's because it's such a fungible pot anyway, it's just there for debt service payments, which would otherwise be funded by your general fund. But that is completely separate than our enterprise funds. Those two are never looked at in the same grouping.
And just to the note about the stadium, while there's revenue that we make from the stadium through the lease and the county and name rights and so on and so forth, really the catalyst project of the stadium was meant to be just that, the catalyst for tax-based improvement. And recall that at the time, the performance indicator that the council set was, could we improve by $100 million in terms of our tax base over a 10-year period? Could we see that kind of improvement? And over a 6 or 7 year period, we saw a $250 million improvement. So just making it be clear, while that's not the same level of what we get when you think about what the stadium brings in directly through payments to the stadium or leasing and things of that nature, there's still what we get. And granted, there's another number that you probably need to think about. That improvement to our tax base yields however much in terms of revenue to the actual city per year because of that kind of catalyst project.
Councilman Andrew, I have no doubt that that's part of the calculation, but what someone new to the budget and new to this cycle would look at is that we've used the stadium as a catalyst to increase our tax base. So why are we potentially increasing property tax? And again, I'm not advocating one way or the other, it's just, this is the optics of that, that's why I'm bringing up these
Yeah.
questions.
And I love that. If you don't mind, let's stay just for a hot second.
Sure.
Because you're right, that $250 million improvement was impressive. In the same year that we realized that this same council cut the rate 3/6. So we're having a conversation about increasing, not because all things equal, we did well and we just want to increase. We're having a conversation about increasing because all things equal, we did well, so well that we thought we'll just cut the rate. But no one else cut the rate at the same time, and we are no longer competitive from a salary, from dealing with inflation, from so many other standpoints in terms of what our increase in costs have been. So I do want to add that one part of it, because I think that's a part of the picture, as you say.
It's not very good, it's just part of the conversation, so.
Next, there's a little bit of discussion on the parking fund subsidy, so just a little bit of background. For the proposed budget, that subsidy is $165,000. If it were eliminated, the parking fund deficit of $165,000 would be covered by parking fund reserves. Our current year-end estimates have that fund balance at about $973,000. The implications on that, if it were eliminated, those reserves, the plan is to use those for capital needs. But kind of as capital comes up is where we would use that. And then what staff would do is, if it were eliminated, we would reassess annually to determine, what's that balance between how much reserves they need, what type of capital they have coming down the pipeline, and do we need to then, if it went away, restore it at some sort of level. And so those are kind of the short and long term if it were eliminated in this budget. And then lastly, the future topics for discussion. And so the housing funding initiatives. And so that topic began a little bit last week during the work session.
I'd mention one thing about the housing funding initiatives. And this was also part of the message or note to staff, that we realize that the private sector is really working and doing the heavy lifting of creating this housing fund. Numbers are somewhere around the $30 or $40 million range is what we're looking to create with this. We haven't gotten a specific ask from the city, but more than likely the city would be asked to participate at a level of somewhere around $2 million to leverage the private investment and the foundation investment that's going there. That would probably be a request that would come into us mid-year, where we would have to come back to council, and staff's recommendation would be we would look to fund balance more than likely to be able to support that type of expenditure. So from our perspective, when we think about this, if we're to make these adjustments to capital, we're making the adjustments to the stadium internal loan payment and even the parking subsidy to some degree, and then we're to come back and ask for some additional funding to support the housing initiatives that we anticipate will happen midway through our fiscal year. You know, we have to keep in mind of what that would do to the overall fund balance number that we have. So, because we did historically look back and see what types of things council has used fund balance for, and in a given year, we may spend somewhere between $1.5 to $2 million throughout the year on different projects that may come up that council may want to pursue. So we have to keep those things in mind. So I just wanted you all to be aware that we have not gotten the ask yet, but I anticipate that it would be coming sometime during this current fiscal year.
So we also have close to $2 million left in ARPA enabled funding, right?
There's about $1.9 that's left there as well that could be used for some other expenses should council decide to do that.
And then just distribution of sales tax, I know we've talked about it through several work sessions, and it's definitely affects not just High Point, but all governments, and so happy to have that conversation down the road. And that concludes my presentation. If there are any questions for myself or staff.
Stephen, thank you so much. All right, are there any questions or comments from council, and just in general, any discussion on the budget?
Well, I want to say thank you. The prioritization is really helpful, I think, for me to see how these play out. And we don't see any positions cut or salaries, not upgraded. So I feel looking at this list, this gives us the most idea of how we can work if we're not going to do the full 3 cents.
This prioritization and just doing the quick math on it, it looks like based on what's proposed and what the amount is in the column that's prioritized, the difference is about $575,000. Is that what, based on this prioritization, that's the savings we anticipate we could have is roughly a little more than $500,000 based on this list?
Yeah, they may not line up perfectly with the priority list. The 500,000 was kind of a number that had been thrown out, and that's how it ended up on that. But for one of the other questions, there was kind of look at fund balance and reduction in capital, and we kind of, through that exercise, went from the bottom of the priority list up until we reached a stopping point.
Yeah, so just assuming that we were looking at that 575 is a little less than half a cent. And I'm just throwing it out there, I guess, because people are looking at this list. If we were to go with this list as it were in terms of prioritization, then ultimately that would still require the 2.5 cent increase.
Potentially. The way it
Without
was,
us looking at fund balance and some other things, right? If we
Right.
just were to say, in terms of prioritization, the way this list is laid out, that saves us about half a penny. And
yeah,
it's still
I think
2.5
half a penny is
cents.
$681,000
Yeah.
without pulling the calculator out.
Maybe we take it one item at a time. There was the suggestion about eliminating the shared use kitchen allocation, which is on this list of prioritization, $350,000. So it would take the 575 that they've saved here in the difference and add 350 to it, takes us up to about 925. So that's a It's more than half a penny, it's probably closer to 3/4 of a penny. I'll throw out the shared use kitchen one, because again, it was suggested. What are the thoughts around the table? Having heard what Madam Manager said today about the shared use kitchen, what we are looking to do with the federal funding, avoiding the deadline we have for spending with that project, is there still wishes from council that we remove the shared use kitchen allocation?
I am quite nervous about it because, again, we don't know how much it's going to cost us in the long run.
So I have a question about it then. So Tasha, a minute ago, you said potentially, but as the design process is going, can we just make sure that, we say we've got a pretty tight budget, and I mean, maybe some design elements would just have to be eliminated.
We'll always look at design
Okay.
elements. We have to make sure that the kitchen is functional.
Okay.
Remember
right.
that the commercial shared use project came out of our larger, we started with our 2018 study looking at our southwest corridor.
Mhm.
We also realized that the RAISE grant is coming through there, and there was a desire of the board at the time to be able to activate that space, both with the Greenway coming through there, with 300 Oak, and with the kitchen. This was also a project that the city worked on with a group of stakeholders in the community. It was one of the projects that came for further research out of the Bloomberg Initiative from 2022, I do believe, when we participated in that program, and we're doing it again this year. So we had a group of stakeholders that were at the table that actually helped us think through how that kitchen needed to be designed and function and laid out to meet the needs of the food entrepreneurs that needed that service here in High Point. Right now, they're either going to Winston-Salem, or they're going to Kernersville, or some other areas, and those facilities were maxed out of their space as well. So the facility, in terms of the size, has been designed based off of that feedback. So I think we would have to be careful that any adjustments that we made would not reduce the efficiencies of what the food entrepreneurs told us that they would like to see in that space. So I think we'll always look at how we can adjust and make sure we have it value engineered as much as possible. But we realize that there are some distinct features, part of that kitchen, for the longevity of it and to make sure we can be used the way that it was intended to be used, that we would not want to cut out of that project. Now, in terms of facade, looks, appeal, those are all things that are on the table that we can make adjustments to. But council would have to keep in mind that it might not have the look and feel that you would want it to have in that corridor that you're trying to reestablish in the southwest.
But since the process has been going on, since the 2018 startup, that's been public knowledge, and a lot of part of that planning has also filtered into the mindset of folks that are investing money down there already, and impending Greenway and that type of urbanization that's taking place. So,
I agree.
Can I
I
ask
totally
why
agree.
we're starting in the middle of the list and not at the bottom?
The reason why is because there was a suggestion specifically made by council to remove it. And we have a slide up here that shows it being removed. And so that's why. I mean, if there's another one on there, we can get to that. But I want to see, because last week it came up at least once or twice. And
I
I think,
suggested it.
yeah.
I would not propose that we remove it. I think that we need to keep it.
I think Councilman Moore makes a good point, is that there are kind of tangential or connected items to this in terms of the entire economic ecosystem that we're trying to build there. And so this may ultimately be the linchpin between someone choosing to invest in that area or not. And so, I mean, if we think about the broader economic impact, is what role does this shared use kitchen play in future investment in economic development in that area? And so if I'm an entrepreneur thinking of what will come up around this area, and I'm thinking about investing, that de-investment from in this project could potentially impact me deciding whether or not to put my investment there in the future.
Well, I have a question. Is it a question of funding it this year partway and funding it next year all the way, or investment or non-investment?
So I think to answer the way they broke it down on the slide is that even if we chose to pull out this year, the full amount of what would be needed would need to be realized at some point. And I mean, revenue is revenue, right? We're not looking to do a tax increase again next year, right? I would think after the heartburn of this year, we wouldn't want to do it 2 years in a row. It's not gonna come out of thin air. I think that's the issue they're bringing up, is that if you choose to try to save because it's a tax rate thing, the tax rate's gonna be a tax rate next year. And granted, we may see property value that improves, that maybe sees and realizes some potential increases in terms of government revenue. Maybe we get more sales tax through the ad valorem split. But there's a good chance that we're sitting right here again next year saying, well, we already cut 375 for that. If we can't do 375 this year for commercial share use, it's gonna be hard to do 750 next year for commercial share use.
Right, that's all I was just asking, like, we're committed, we can't not do it.
Bingo.
So
Part of
it's-
that program too, keep in mind, it's tied to the federal grant
Right.
and the ARPA fund, so I spoke my feelings on the philosophy and change in business of private and public sector. So everybody knows where I stand on that. The fact of the matter is, us and every other city in the country's chosen to go down that road, like it or not. And so how do you balance it? And to Councilman Andrews' point, I'm with you. We don't know. It just seems like everything keeps going up. And you're on finance committee. We're getting asked to re-look at quotes and make adjustments every week, including tomorrow.
Correct.
So none of us have a crystal ball on that bigger macro piece as to what it's going to be.
So I actually appreciate the way Councilmember Cook laid it out, that if we are saying we gotta do this, is our appetite such that we would take the chance to not do 375 this year and assume that we'll see revenue growth where we can do 750 next year? That, I think, is what we'll come to consensus around, because it doesn't sound like there's close to majority consensus regarding not doing the project at all.
Well, my position is very similar to Councilwoman Peters. I think we've committed to this project. I think some of our community partners understand this project and its meaning to their economic investment in our city. We're committed to it, and if we can't do 375 now, it's going to be much more difficult to do this increasingly as we kick the can down the road. So this cost is going to continue to snowball if we don't meet it now. And so going back and saying that, and hopefully we're looking at increased revenues and some efficiencies, but as we can't keep putting off these costs. It's like, today's cost will not be tomorrow's cost. And that's the thing that we have to make sure that we take into account as we deal with these budgets.
Who are the community partners that we are addressing?
You've got Steinway that's opening up a new showroom next week, I think.
So, sorry, is your question about community partners for 300 Oak, or what businesses have started investing in
Well,
the corridor?
during this conversation, we've heard business and community partners.
You've heard two different things.
That's
Which
right.
one?
So I'm trying to find out what I'm hearing is that we've more or less committed to this project, and then there are partners waiting for us to do our part before they jump in.
Well,
Do we know who those are?
Some have already jumped in.
Yeah.
All the old Merle Hayworth property and all that I never get his name right.
Ribbon.
Yeah, and he's invested millions down there, knowing of the other stuff that has been discussed and possibly committed to for that area, and even probably a broader piece of High Point by Designs,
Yeah.
eyeing that area. as I said, Steinway's took over in behind Pandora's and opening another. So there is activity bubbling up there. And then, again, the Raised Grant Greenway connection is part of municipalities across the country that are pushing that as an important piece of livability and economic development.
Understood. Yeah, Councilman Andrew, and to delineate the private sector businesses that he just mentioned who are investing, have already started investing, securing property, doing development already. We've got stuff being approved from a permitting standpoint, planning and zoning standpoint for that development. I think Councilman Moore just spoke to that. Some of the community partners who are at the table with us for 300 Oak, and at this point, I'll defer, Madam Manager, I don't know who we're at liberty to share just yet, not that we like to, but there are folks who have been in discussions with us regarding, I mean, this is a project that not only has commercial shared use attached to it, but you're looking at workforce development opportunities, looking at small business support opportunities. Because in many cases, when we sat down our retreat, fall 2022, this was viewed as a Catalyst 2.0, because it's an area of town, in some ways adjacent to the district that we've already begun to revitalize, and we just talked about the incredible financial return that's come from that. This sort of Catalyst 2.0 was geared towards being different from that first one. The first one looked at what it is to do downtown life, because ultimately we just wanted to create demand and see property values improve. Catalyst 2.0 looks at still a similar thing, create the demand, property values improve, but not only does it sit adjacent to this downtown district, it sits adjacent to Southside neighborhood. It sits inside the poorest census tract in the state. It sits right where we have this greenway coming through. It sits inside a corridor that historically meant something when it comes to manufacturing. There are folks at the table who can talk much better about it than I do, but I mean, the reason why there's been so much research, you talk about the small scale manufacturing group and that task force, Opportunity Zone Task Force. I mean, there's been people spending copious amounts of time, I think, sort of researching and looking at what this opportunity could be. This has been the fruition of that. And I can tell you, I've had a number of meetings just in this first 5 months of us being on council, where some of those community partners who are ready for themselves to pull the trigger to make really big commitments to be at that site with us are saying, when can we make the commitment? Because if you all don't make a decision soon, X organization in this city is recruiting us the same exact way. And we've got limited resources and we want to invest and work with you all. And so in some ways, just like we do with economic development, we have to ask ourselves, do we want to sort of wait? Because if the 375 is not allocated, or 350, sorry, is not allocated this year, we don't start design and those conversations stall.
Wait.
Maybe we lose opportunities.
I thought the 375 was for the finishings and furnishings
It's for
and expenditures, so that's at the end. They started the design regardless, and the construction is included. We're not paying for either of those.
Yeah, but sorry, let me say it another way, and then you're right. The folks who we've sat in meetings with, and again, I don't know, Madam Manager, who we're at sort of liberty to say,
The two that have committed publicly have been Business High Point with the generator expansion project that's going there. And there's some state funding that they have attached to be able to move the generator, but that's coming into the 300 Oak facility. And the other board that we've had public meetings with is Guilford Works, because we wanted to make sure that the workforce development piece was there. And what's enticing about the move to this location for Guilford Works is the neighborhood that it would be in and the fact that it's on a public transit route. Their current facility is not. So those are the two public entities that we have met, had conversations with their board, shared the initial layout of the plan, and their boards are in agreement that they wanted to move forward with the city and the project. So we're still working on, first, the building envelope for 300 Oak, looking at the mechanical systems that would be needed to support those. And once we get those two anchor tenants settled and what their layouts look like and what they need, then we'll be able to look at the remainder of the building and determine what space might be available for others to come alongside of us.
And if I could just add something, so as far as like the private sector and some partners, we've been talking about this urban greenway for a really long time. And I've heard Tom Van Dessel say before, and, publicly, he made that investment on the Picket Cotton Mill with Splashworks. And well, back then it was Buzzy Space. And he specifically said of all the locations that they were looking at in the country of the United States, they chose that because of the talks about the urban greenway, way before we even got the race grant, when it was just a pipe dream. Meanwhile, okay, so now the people that are in there, he had somebody coming for a job interview, literally called him from the parking lot, an excellent, just an excellent employee, it would have been great, called him from the parking lot and said, I can't work here, it's too dangerous. That area has been bleeding our city dry, and I have worked really, really super hard for the last almost 7 years. And we, even at our retreat too, we've all said that we're committed to that area. A historic industrial corridor area of cities all across our country have dealt with that same fate, and people have had faithful courage and made investments and changed people's lives, and it's going to affect our entire city. And it's our jobs, I feel like, to make sure that people understand that. So there's a lot. There's the Cisco folks, they're moving all their headquarters from, and we took you over there. So they're making a major investment from California over there. We've got Rudy with Schwung, they're doing that 313 space over there in Centennial. They've got the other space that they're going to start breaking ground in this fall. We've got Red Band Tardigill. I mean, we're talking massive amount. I mean, it's just so ready, poised for such great success. And I just pray that y'all believe in it, and let's just keep moving that needle forward. We've all talked about the Catalyst 2.0. We realize that that's basically low-hanging fruit now that we've gotten the $19.8 million race grant. We got the $7.3 million FEMA brick grant. I mean, that area, people are recognizing that area and realizing that it's time to make it better.
Yeah, and Councilman Peters, we'd be remiss not to mention Southwest Renewal Foundation.
Yes,
And what they've done, you talk about community partners, I mean, the effort of time and energy and resources that they've contributed and
Absolutely.
secured for this effort has been, I think, nothing short of impressive.
Working on one right now with the Southwest Renewal Foundation. I mean, and everybody knows the Southwest Renewal Foundation and Dorothy, they have been an amazing partner with the city in trying to help us find funds to have clean air, clean water, revitalize that area. So absolutely, thank you. I'm sorry I didn't bring them up. But.
So it sounds like right now, there isn't the appetite to push on cutting the commercial shared use kitchen expense. Maybe we transition to the next slide, I think, or we do a couple of things. There's discussion on using fund balance that I think needs to go ahead and be hashed out. And then I think Councilmember Cook, what you uplifted is that there may be some other items on this capital projects list that may be worth looking at. So you all tell me which route would you like to go?
Well, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I think since the fund balance discussion is really uncharted territory from what we've done on past budgets, I think we probably should address that.
Go ahead and hash it out.
Yeah.
With that, I know Madam Manager took some time to really go through this, and Stephen as well. Thank you both. Fund balance, historically, and based on precedents that we use it for one-time expenses. There's items in the past that we could note and reference, and even I think in this short-term future, the items that have the potential to be supported, such as the housing fund, right? It's a one-time contribution. It's not something that you look to do year over year. I think the biggest distinction here is, if the fund balance is something that we use for one-time expenses, what do we do about the items that require recurring revenue to support year over year? And I'll throw that out there for the people to have some discussion.
Well, my whole point of this is, I'm the one that suggested these things, right? Is that we're way past the threshold of 10%, and right now it's, for the general fund balance is 18.3% projected. And I mean, taking $1 million out of that for either things I suggested or another reason, takes it down to 17.7. So it's not a draconian kind of utilization of general fund balance has has increased dramatically over the last few years, and that's kind of my point. So we're not like skating on thin ice, like Greens were at 9% or whatever, so that was my point. So.
And I don't think, I didn't see a proposal where the fund balance was gonna be used on recurring items. Was that
No.
part of the proposal?
I mean, some of these things are recurring, but I mean,
Your capital is recurring item.
Just capital in
Capital in
general.
general is you always have capital in your budget.
Okay.
And the loan payment, I mean, you're gonna have that until it's paid off, so that's recurring expense. The council can choose to spend fund balance and to use it to help balance the budget. Staff just wanted to make sure the council was aware that tradition has not been our practice over the last 10 years, even when there have been some tough times that we've had, is to use reserves to balance the budget.
Steve, could you remind us or restate what the resulting years would look like if we were to use fund balance of whatever proportion of fund balance for this year's budget? What would that look like in the next fiscal year's budgets that we would need to do, or how would that affect next couple of fiscal years' budgets?
Okay, there's two ways I'll approach this response. First, on the fund balance percentage. It's percent of your general fund budget, the 10% policy that we're talking about. So the proposed general fund budget is about $147 million. So every 1.47 million that gets used lowers it 1%. The other kind of angle to look at this is what it does to next year's budget. So let's say you use, I'm just use $1 million, just a number I'm throwing out there for the example. Use $1 million with the intent, we're going to use this one time. Well, absent revenue growth or expense reductions, we immediately start next year's budget $1 million short. And you know, so that's a hole to start with if that was something council chose to do, and staff worked diligently to come up with options but that would be the reality of if the intent is just to use it one time, as opposed to reducing a recurring expense.
So what we're looking at is potentially closing our budget gap this year, but extending the gap wider potentially next year if we don't have revenues to match, to close that gap.
Potentially.
And so the resulting thing is we would have to make further larger cuts, yes, next year, use a larger proportion of fund balance, or raise taxes 4.5% to close that budget gap.
Or there's the potential that your just natural growth in your general purpose revenues could make it up.
Could make it up.
But
Could.
yeah.
Could.
but if we're expecting the sales tax to increase, I mean, $300,000 per penny, then that's the expectation, isn't it? I mean, all things being equal.
But
I mean, assuming we have like a 2-cent property tax increase,
Yeah.
that's $600,000.
right, so I think the discussion we need to make clear is if we're talking about using money out of fund balance, that means that we're not having any type of percentage increase on the rate. Or are we talking about some type of proportion of rate increase plus fund balance distribution?
That'd be up for.
Well, I'm saying that's the discussion that we need to have if we're gonna talk about how this is gonna affect off your next few years' budgets.
So, but to speaking to the third option was one of the ideas was that you could basically table some of the capital projects and then see how the revenues fall and then approve them individually. So for example, because it is at the bottom of the list, if we said the Northwest High Point Connector Road study at $175,000, if we table it now so we don't include it in this budget, then we can reduce the rate increase by that amount. And then if there is $175 in savings down the road, that we could approve it individually later. So that way, when we came around next year, it would not affect the, it would not be on the list for next year, so it would not put us $175,000 behind for next year. It would just affect the rate increase.
So
And we could decide then if we wanted
I think I
to.
get what you're saying. You're talking about finding resulting reductions in capital expenses, one-time use distribution from fund balance, and a smaller rate increase for this year's budget.
well, I'm not even saying using fund balance up front. I'm saying we could choose to do it later, as we do with some items that come out throughout the year. We could just have this be on the list that if it works out that we get 300,000 more for one penny, then we could put 175 towards this. And that would just be something that staff could bring back to us in this year. So we could reduce the rate increase by that amount, however much we decide. That's why we asked for this list, was so we could decide if we cut them. We may not be saying we're gonna cut them forever. We're just saying we're not gonna improve them in this budget right now. But if the revenues come in, we can start approving some of the ones off the list.
Can I ask a question? Trying to look past this year for a second. Because part of tax rate increases is not just what will be enacted and supported for this fiscal year, coming fiscal year, but it's what it gives us the flexibility and capacity and wherewithal to do going forward. I'm thinking about a few things. I'm thinking about the fact that year over year, we'll be doing pay studies. While this year's pay study yields that we need to increase for fire and police, I'm very curious, and it's very hard to forecast it because that's the whole point of studies and you don't know what the market's gonna do. But I'd be curious if we are in the kind of position needed to be able to support any ongoing increases that may happen to personnel. I'm also very curious, and I keep going back to the Davenport presentation that we had several months ago. where Davenport basically made it clear, not only is your bond rating impacted where your fund balance is, but it's impacted by the amount of revenue that you bring in, basically through your property tax. That is the big thing we do. We don't have some of the other stuff, Dr. Perry food tax and some of the other stuff. And I'm thinking about future projects that is on the radar. It may not be mentioned in this budget, but I don't know, I'm probably more transparent than I need to be. At some point, we have to look at Main Street. And we knew 12 years ago that Main Street severely impacted pedestrian movement and foot traffic in the core of our city, because it's a highway. It's been told us multiple times, you literally have 311 going through the middle of your city. I'm thinking about the cost of what that is. Thinking about the fact that we have to redo a dam. When are we redoing that dam? That's like the next few years.
It's in design right now.
It's in design right now. And dams might be the most expensive capital project we end up having. It isn't like $100 million to do that dam.
We don't know, it's in design.
Mid-30s.
Mid-30s?
Till it's designed.
I think I was doing Ken's math, my bad.
That's a late cost estimate.
I'm thinking about all of the projects that are still yet to come. I think about the fact that in 5 points, we've been saying to folks, my former constituents on Ward 1, we said, when is significant infrastructure investment coming to our area? Much like we're talking about Southside right now. And when I would say to people about this potential micro hub that we'd have, the excitement people would have, and they say, is it really gonna happen? Right. That's gonna be a capital project that's gonna have an experience. When I think about what the 3 cents does, it's not just about line items here, it's the flexibility and ability and capacity to down the road be able to finance the projects that many of us campaigned on because constituents told us it was important. And my worry is 18 months from now, we're gonna get something that comes up and it's a capital project that we've been wanting to pull the string on, and the manager's looking at us saying, we can't borrow that without significantly impacting our bond rating. But Davenport told us, had you done it 3 cents, it gives you a lot of flexibility for a lot of projects.
Well, and I'll be totally honest with you, I've had several very, very conservative folks call me and tell me that they appreciate us trying to find a way to not do the 3 cent, but they'd much rather just go ahead and do the 3 cent now than do like 2 this year and then do another increase next year. I'm very, very conservative people have called me.
That's a good point, if it has to go that way, but it's also, nobody's got that crystal ball
Right.
to know what next year's gonna
Right.
bring. I mean, Winston just announced a big jump.
Yeah.
So
But I'm just saying, not everybody is saying, don't raise, I mean, some people get it and say, hey, no.
And also, we have to realize that Greensboro reduced their tax rate 3 cents at the same time that we did. And then the next year, they saw the budget impact and they raised it 4 cents. And so I think we have to also think about potentially what that looks like as we continue to keep this tax rate as it is. I'm not gonna say we were warned, but, when we reduced 3 cents, we were given what the next subsequent budgets would look like. And we chose not to put that 3 cents back. And now we're here. And now we're looking at downstream impact to our ability to meet capital projects, not just things that we have on the books, but future needs and investment. And I think that what we have to take a look at is the difference between spending and investment here. This is long-term investment into our city's growth that will yield us tax receipts in the future, that will increase our tax base in the future. And so we're impacting our ability to be able to do that if we don't put back the 3 cents that we cut 2 years ago.
But the largest part of all this discussion is not the capital projects.
No.
The largest part of this has to do with the basic personnel and delivery of expected services that go out.
Because, and I certainly agree, Councilmember Moore, because if you think folks are gonna be mad about a 3 cent increase, reduce services. Then you're gonna hear wailing and gnashing of teeth, right? That's gonna be the worst thing, so. If we can't meet those basic services, then I think ultimately, our purpose here is not being met.
I'm not gonna vote for a 3% property tax increase. I know we need to do one, but, I mean, there's lots of flexibility here. Something we can take advantage of.
You think it's too much, 3%?
Yeah,
3 cents, not 3.
3 cents. Yeah,
3
3
cents.
cents. That's where the math is.
I think, and I said this
I may be in the
to,
minority on that, but I'm just sharing that right now.
I said this to the city manager this week. I just don't want to be viewed like our state legislature sitting on a pile of money and saying we can't do things. I think there's a lot of what ifs, but the biggest what if is what if the investments that we're making pay off and the revenues increase? That's great. That's what we hope happens. But we're not hearing that. We're hearing, a bunch of other what ifs that, when we're talking about not going to half a cent or not going to, 1 penny, I don't see the emergency in that. And so I think that's where, I do appreciate people speaking up for the projects that they know about, because I think that's the other part of it, is that it needs to be on the record, the things that people are passionate about, the vision that people are seeing through that have the history. And I like the fact that that's being spoken on the record. I think that there have been some creative solutions that have been put forth and they're not being fleshed out, in my opinion.
Yeah, so how would you do it? What's your recommendation?
Well, I mean, I like when you look at this page 10 on the document from the staff. I think starting with, we haven't done any type of straw poll to see, is there even a majority that's good with 3 cents? If there is, then you've got the majority and you don't really need to have this discussion. I haven't heard whether that's the case or not, so I don't know. If not, then who would vote for 2.5 cents and have that discussion? I don't know if people don't want to say on the record. I appreciate Councilman Harmon for going on the record saying he's not going to vote for it. I also am not going to vote for it.
It's a real conundrum. I never like to raise taxes, but I also am not thrilled about the discussion of changing what has been a very successful use of our general fund policy through the years. I know that others do it. But, you know, it's nice to have the rainy day funds when the emergencies and big issues come up, which do. So I'm not in favor of that policy shift. I'm only one person.
I agree with Councilman Moore. I don't want to change the way we have typically funded our budget by income down. So I'm not in support of that shift either.
Well, and I just want to add that I think that our city management team is amazing. We've got an amazing city manager, and I know that she's been very, very diligent and with all the department heads and everything in trying to create a budget for us. And I have a lot of faith and belief in her and her staff. So I would vote yes for this proposed budget.
I just want to say, I agree with Councilwoman Peterson. One thing I learned that if we're not in a position to see what's going on around us, or what needs to be done, it's hard for us to put ourselves in Tanya's township place, because she's been doing this for so many years. She has the knowledge and of how to do a budget, how to budget the whole city. So if you feel this strong about it and you have tried every way that you could try to make sure that we have to raise any taxes at all, then like Mama said, with your experience in it, and I know about the fund, because sometimes things do happen. When I worked with the city government before, things do come up that you don't expect to come up. And it's good to know you got the funding to be able to support it and take care of it. Because if you don't, then how you gonna get the funding? So I agree with Councilwoman Peterson about our staff. Y'all doing a good job.
Yeah, I think in terms of the policy on spending general fund balance for recurring things, or spending on something assuming it'll be one time, and then keeping our capital, what we have available for capital low, it doesn't sound like the mark of a city that is committed to the strategic priorities that we all build consensus around. And quite frankly, again, I know I'm more transparent than a good politician needs to be. It does sound like the things a lot of us campaign on, to be honest. I think that if you talk to the average High Pointer, let's just say your assumption right now is it needs to be 2.5 cents or 2 cents. I'm looking at this chart here that tells me on a $250,000 home, 2.5 cents means that you're trying to save someone $1 a month. Which, again, for someone on a fixed income, I respect that. I want to help every single person. But I don't anticipate that in this business environment that we are in, that we are better off saving everyone $1 a month versus hampering the capacity we need to do capital projects, operations, and personnel for the next several years. And to the point made about sitting on surpluses and not doing anything with it, I think this council, at least those of us I know who have been in here 4 years and now into another term, I've been bold before. I would put our resume up against anyone's when it comes to not sitting on our hands. I think we get a lot done. And I would hope it's not been the trend, at least what we perceive to be the trend of this council, that we're gonna get a surplus and sit on it. We've got a staff that grinds every single day to make the most out of what services are. I mean, we overshot the moon with our Catalyst project in downtown. In the just discussions I had this afternoon, if I told y'all the stuff people are talking about in terms of investment, we overshot the moon on that. And then we doubled down with Catalyst 2.0. And just by talking about it in a public meeting, the amount of folks who begin to invest, I would love for staff to go look at the Southwest Corridor to see what level of purchases and investment we've seen already in terms of improvement just to that area. Because when government, this council, decides that we are adamant about moving forward on the city's vision, our community comes along. And if it means they spend an extra $1 a month, an extra $2 a month, an extra $3 a month, I don't take it lightly. It just means that we have to do doggone good stuff with it. And that's probably where I stand.
Well, to that point, you're back to the capital projects, and I appreciate it. It goes back to my point of the blend. I'll leave that there. But I think maybe even staff will speak to this. I don't want there to be a public perception that our departments try to spend every penny that's budgeted in their budget because it's going to impact the way that staff anticipates what they're going to need for next year. That's not the way our departments work. It hasn't been that way since I've been here. But there is a narrative out there that, well, this department, they're going to spend every penny you give them, because if they don't spend it, then they're not going to get that much next year. And they don't start their budgets every year from that framework. That's not the way it works.
Councilman Andrew, the ideas that we have moving forward and the vision that we have, which you've eloquently described earlier, isn't well communicated. If I go on the City of High Point's website right now, I don't know anything about that. So if we are going to make this kind of investment, have that kind of vision, and maybe I'm speaking because I just don't know because I'm a new guy, but I would hope that we would be able to communicate that better and perhaps get better buy-in from the public. From the public forum meetings I've had for the folks that reached out to me, there have been overwhelming opposition to this increase. And I've run through the budgets, and I was the one that made the initial spreadsheet that looked at the delta of anything that was above 100,000 or greater than 10%, and put it in the spreadsheet and all this stuff like that. So that's where I am. It's like if we have this grand vision, then let's communicate it and let's get better buy-in. So that's all I'll say.
I mean, that's what the TEC committee is trying to communicate better with the general public about the things the city is trying to
And I
accomplish.
think that communication specialist that we approved, that's part of what hopefully that will achieve, is having somebody dedicated to communicating the vision. And I don't disagree with the vision, I don't disagree with the work that the staff has done. I just agree that we could wait and see if the revenues follow the dream. And I think that, I just think that saying $1 per month is true of homeowners. It is not necessarily true of the repercussions to people who do not own their home and pay rent. All it takes is one headline that says that we raise taxes and rentals can do whatever they want with that, and they can blame it on us. And I'm willing to take the hit on things that I truly intend to do, but I'm not willing to take the hit on something that is not my intention. And so if somebody's rent increases $100 and they're told it's because we raised taxes and that's why they had to raise their rent, that's not something that I can easily explain. And I know that half a cent versus a cent may seem negligible, but I also think saying that we're willing to critically look at the projects and make decisions individually and not just full-fledged pass something through is meaningful to a lot of people in the public.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I won't speak on the rent part. I think if someone's increasing rent $100 and blaming it on the city, then to Councilman Andrews' point, I'd love for us to communicate better about why that slumlord's just not good for the city. Like, I'm sorry, I know I'm on record saying that, but that's terrible. That would be really terrible if that actually happened. I think, to your point, because I heard it said that people have given recommendations, which I appreciate. What I don't want to assume is that there's been recommendations with the calculations folks have done, and that somehow that's negated. Instead, I think there's an appreciation for the calculations that our paid staff have done for months to get ready for this. So to Councilman Andrews' point, I appreciate you looking at everything above 100,000, everything 10%. I appreciate all of it.
That exercise was not meant to disparage the staff. I do appreciate the exercise they've done. This is, I'm the new guy. I just wanted to see what those numbers were done. So I'm by no means saying that staff did not do their job. I applaud their efforts. I just wanted to think outside the box, and that's what we get paid to do.
No, I appreciate that. So I just want to be clear, because I heard it said a couple of times that us not hearing the calculation, we heard it. I'm hearing all calculations, so. Are there any other discussions in terms of any pieces here? Do people have questions? Let's vote.
Not today.
Okay. All right.
I would be curious, just for the record, the proposed increase, what was your recommendation, Councilman Andrew? What was the proposed increase?
I didn't offer a proposed increase at all.
So
I just
your
looked at-
recommendation was zero increase?
What I looked at was based on anything that was year-to-year increase of $100,000 or a greater than 10% increase year over year. What are the impacts of not doing that? In fact, what I did is I took the proposed FY25 budget and reduced it to 95% of the ask, and then did a tally on that to see what the impact of that would be.
So my question, I know I'm oversimplifying it, but if you were voting in favor of something, the only vote you give is for zero increase.
Yeah.
Okay, so Tim's zero increase. Amanda, if you were voting on something, it would
Well, it
be.
sounds like y'all have to vote for the 3 cents, so I don't know what this,
Well, it's consensus building. Your number is what, 2.5 cents?
well, I would prefer to be at 2.
Okay.
But I don't see any purpose in putting that, to keep people here
Yeah.
if the consensus has already been built with enough votes to pass it.
You never know whose mind could change. Your number was 2 or 2.5?
2.
2, okay, all right. Good. Any, yes,
I have a
Mr.
question. So they're saying 2 cents, so is there a way that we can do the 2 cents?
We've looked at that with Madam Manager.
Obviously, things won't be, cuts in time, but.
Council would have to be willing to make some adjustments in ongoing operations, not one-time expenses of capital or deferred payments. We would have to look at ongoing operations, or if there's some kind of programs that we've already started that council might want to shift to be able to get to that level.
Yeah, in the very first budget session, I think your team shared with us what it looks like to only do the 2 cent and what that impact would be. So there is some of that in case folks want to go back.
Well, they have presented the options to us in the back, and today's Wednesday. And the hope is, the hope is that we would be able to have a vote and get a budget passed at whatever level on Monday if we can, but that's not the end of the world, right? I mean, you want to give them time to get everything together, and it's a lot of work that goes into putting the budget, whatever approved together and ready to submit. And I think that would be the will of staff, but the budget deadline is
June 30th.
June 30th.
Technically,
Yeah,
yes.
June 30th,
Council
right.
could always call a special meeting,
Yeah.
but we never, we typically have it
I
approved by the
just-
first meeting.
Yeah, and like, so we could sleep on this, study the options there, then that gives people a little bit of time to maybe talk to staff, getting individual questions and clarifications as to, maybe some of your particular points on what's in that growth. I think you've had some of those discussions.
Councilmember
And
Moore.
then, yes,
I would say it's helpful for council to have the conversations together because there has to be a consensus or the majority of the board that wants us to move in a certain direction. Sometimes after the meeting's in, if there's one message that comes in or one suggestion that comes in, that's not enough for staff to take action. We can answer the question, but it's not enough members for us to take action to make an adjustment. So it's helpful to be able to have the conversation take place with the board together. And if there's consensus of, make an adjustment or not, then staff can go back and do that. But after the meeting, it's harder for staff to know, is this the will of one or if this is the will of the body?
Understood.
So at this point, just to make sure I'm clear, on Monday, would we talk about this proposed budget and it would either pass or not? And then we'd have to,
If the will of the consensus of the group is to move forward with the budget, I think that's what the mayor was trying to understand.
right.
Then staff would move forward with preparing this for council on Monday night. If council, there's consensus to do something different based on the feedback that comes out of today, then we would go back, make some adjustments, and then present that on Monday night. Or council can choose to have another work session, and then we could schedule another work session on the calendar and see if there's consensus that the council comes to at that next meeting. I think at this point, it's helpful to have the conversation with the entire group together.
We need to direct this.
So right now, because of what's been proposed and what we're hearing, if nothing else is said, city manager and her staff will, for Monday, have for us the budget with the 3-cent tax increase for us to vote on, to vote up or vote down.
If that's the will of the board, we can prepare that for Monday.
Got you. No, I'm sorry, I was just talking to council.
Okay.
Seems that's what the will of the majority is.
Any other questions? Okay. I want to point out Madam Manager's point about if there's discussions, it helps to have it amongst the full group. So if you've got questions, I do encourage you to go ahead and have it. As much as I know we all love to just go ahead and go home, I want to make sure that whatever we do, we feel ready for June 3rd.
I mean, this is the same, the proposed budget that we've had for a month now, so I mean, obviously, some of us are not gonna vote for it, and, I mean, so it kind of, I mean, it's nothing new, I mean, I've said my piece a number of times. And, so be it. I mean, it's the act of the body, right? I mean, so, and us three, I mean, we're on the decision, it's a decision of the body. So I'm on the business side. I'm a liberal always all the time, so.
Okay, well, hearing no further discussion on, yes, ma'am.
Okay, is there a chance to give, well, I guess we may want, I don't know if anybody else want to do it or not, but to at least all the projects listed here, do everyone agree with, the price that we're asking for each one of these, capital projects?
I think that was asked last week, and it was an estimation based on like what staff had investigated, correct?
Yeah, the capital projects are our estimates that we have at this time. Now, clearly at the time that, contracts were let, bids were coming in, you may have some fluctuation. Your budget is always seen as your planning document. So we realized that there's gonna be some adjustments on some of these things that come in. That's why those items, as contracts were let, they'll come through finance committee. You actually get to see those numbers at that point, and you're awarding the contracts and agreements. So you have to think about it in terms of these are your planning documents. So these are the estimates, the best estimates that we have at this time. But there shouldn't, I don't want anyone to be, surprised if something comes when the actual contract comes to you and there's some slight shifts, some margin of error there. That's pretty common.
Yes.
All right, hearing no further discussion, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion's made by Mayor Pro Tem. Is there a second to adjourn? Second made by Councilwoman Keeper. Any discussion on the motion to adjourn our special meeting? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any against? The ayes have it, we are adjourned.